The Dunmer weren't always the ashy-skinned and crimson-eyed natives of Morrowind. At one point, they were almost indistinguishable from the Altmer. While I paint this portrait of a Dunmer, let's take a look at their history and culture. The Dunmer are incredibly intelligent, while also being strong and agile. They make great warriors and spellcasters, and are general all-rounders when it comes to their offensive capabilities, being good with bow, sword and spell, though they have a particular penchant for destruction magic. Their lifespans are similar to that of the other mer races. Several centuries is not uncommon, with some Dunmer mages extending their lifespans far beyond that into millennia. They are a proud and aloof people, and the clans that call Morrowind home are no strangers to intrigue and betrayal, making the other races of Tamriel somewhat distrustful of the Dunmer, who see them as ruthless and quick to anger. The history of the Dunmer starts with the history of their precursors, the Chimer. These golden-skinned elves followed the prophet Veloth from the Somerset Isles to what was then known as Resdain. Now it's known as Morrowind. They brought with them a deep reverence for the worship of their ancestors, a trait still present in modern Dunmer society. As their society began to fracture into castes, the divide between nobility and the commoners fed into their religious beliefs, with some of the most prominent nobility being deified and claimed as ancestors to some of the most powerful Dunmer houses. With class divides broadening in the Somerset Isles, many left the Isles for pastures new, and the Chimer, as well as the early Sigic Order, were among those to leave. But the Chimer would not remain the Chimer forever. Their transformation came after one of the most important events in Tamrielic history, the Battle of Red Mountain. The battle deserves a video all of its own, but to be brief, this conflict would see the death of an ancient and well-respected war leader, Indoril Nerevar, and the complete disappearance of the Dwemer race. It would also lead to the ascension to godhood of 4 of Nerevar's councillors, the Tribunal. It was the Tribunal's lack of remorse for stealing the power of the Heart of Lorcan that prompted Azura to curse the Chimer with grey skin and red eyes, so all might see their treachery. The Chimer, or now Dunmer, didn't see this as a curse. In fact, they wear it like a badge of honour, as it proclaims to all of Tamriel that the Tribunal ascended to godhood. While there were rumours that staring a Dunmer in the eye would cause one to fall into oblivion itself, scholars quickly discovered that, for the most part, the Dunmer remained much the same as the Chimer. The only change was in their appearance. A change that did occur, however, was among the houses of the Dunmer, those of noble lineage. They supplanted worship of the Daedra and replaced it with worship of the Tribunal. Ashlanders, those on the lower levels of society, mostly nomads, would declare the Tribunal as false gods and continue their worship of the Daedra. This schism in the Dunmer people would last for millennia, and the Ashlanders would be forced to live on the outskirts of Morrowind's landmass and society. The Tribunal would use their newfound divinity to protect the Dunmer from foreign invasions, natural disasters and their arch-enemy, Dagoth Ur. Like most mer though, they would come to blows with the Empire of Man. Though where the Dunmer differ to that of the other elven races is in the outcome of their battles. Morrowind, and by extension the Dunmer, have never been under the dominion of the Empire. Instead, they fought each other to a stalemate, culminating in the signing of the Savant Truce, a victory of sorts for the Dunmer, and making them the only people on all of Tamriel to have never lived under Imperial rule, though later they would be seen as an autonomous province of the Empire. As the Dunmer entered the Second Era, they found a time of relative peace. Though Morag Tong would throw a spanner in the works with a series of assassinations and cause the collapse of the Second Empire and the start of the Interregnum. Slavery would also see a huge increase with the Empire fighting among itself. While this had been going on since the First Era, the Second Era saw the number of Argonians enslaved skyrocket, with the Dunmer houses of Dres and Telvanni now free to exploit Black Marsh without the ire of the Empire. Entire tribes of Argonians were dragged off in chains, to live, work and die under the Dunmer whip. The subjugation of the Argonians would allegedly push an Argonian shaman to create the Nahatan flu, which would go on to claim countless lives across Tamriel, though this is debated by Tamrielic scholars. The Argonians wouldn't earn their freedom for some time. until the fighting between the Nords, the Akaviri and the Dunmer would reach its peak in the Battle of Vivik's Antlers. The Argonians' timely intervention would secure their freedom and a place in the Ebonheart Pact. We'll go into that into more detail with our deep dive into the Argonians, but suffice to say that without the Argonians' help, Tamriel would look like a very different place. The Ebonheart Pact was an uneasy alliance. The Argonians would never view the Dunmer as anything other than oppressors, and the Dunmer were nervous around their slaves-turned-allies, who were now heavily armed and free. Even in modern Morrowind, some Dunmer still hold on to the flawed belief that Argonians are lesser beings and should be treated as such. With the return of the Tribunal's most hated enemy, Dagoth, the Tribunal was forced to sign the Treaty of Armistice with Tiber Septim, making Morrowind an autonomous province of the Empire, a move that angered some Dunmer, who saw it as a betrayal. They were right, in a sense, as the Dunmer under the Armistice was hamstrung, forced to give over the powerful Numidium to the Empire and allow a large contingency force of Imperials a place in Morrowind. The Empire did stay its hand at most points, allowing the Tribunal the power they held before the treaty, though Morrowind did have to make concessions and live under Imperial law, though with exceptions made to the powerful Dunmer houses. As we move into the Third Era, Dagoth awakens and brings with him the Ash Blight, a weather phenomenon that are described as rolling storms and red dust. These clouds of volcanic dust brought with them diseases that resisted normal cures, and Corpus, a disease that twisted an organism into a vicious monster, incapable of seeing friend from foe. These storms wiped out many species that were familiar to the Dunmer, such as cliffstriders, Nyx oxen and Vardvarks. It closed mines, killed crops and most kinds of flora. Hunters starved, herders grew ill and watched their herds perish, and farmers watched their crops wither and die. Even Quama egg mines, deep under Morrowind soil, were not immune to the Blight's destruction. As the Blight spread, the Vvardenfell crisis began. Ships were turned away from the island, who feared the Blight spreading among the population. As the crisis progressed, the Tribunal's power collapsed with the advent of the Nerevarine, the reincarnation of Nerevar, who Azura had promised would come to balance the scales. The Nerevarine severed the Tribunal from the power of the Heart of Lorkhan. Releasing the heart destroyed Dagoth and the Tribunal were either killed or went missing. Having righted the wrongs of the past, the Nerevarine left the Dunmer to decide their own fate. The Tribunal had held in place the moon Bar-Dur, a gift from Sheogorath, which was on a collision course for Vivec City. With the Tribunal dead or missing, the moon collided with the city, utterly destroying it and leaving Vvardenfell a smoking and ruinous place, in what would later be called the Red Year. As a result, many Dunmer have fled their homeland in search of a brighter future, and that is where we find the Dunmer in the events of the game so far, their fate to be determined in the Elder Scrolls 6. So let's move on now to their rich and varied culture. The Dunmer and their culture is roughly divided in two halves. The Ashlanders, nomadic tribes who roam Morrowind, and the Great Houses, who hold sway over the cities and industry of the Dunmer. Both groups hold their ancestors in high regard and celebrate Ancestors' Day, where they gather around the family hearth and share food and drink to honour their ancestors' spirits. It's a quiet and respectful day, rather than a joyous occasion. The Dunmer are excellent hunters and take full advantage of the native fauna of their homeland. Ashhopper meat and jelly is a delicacy, as well as being a useful reagent in alchemy. Their use of chitin in armour and weaponry is second to none, and they have a particular knack in making coloured glass that is prized in the corner clubs of Morrowind. The lands of Morrowind are also incredibly fertile, thanks to the ash from Red Mountain, though the crops they grow reflect the fungal aspect of their homeland. Herders keep Bantam Guar for meat and eggs, and Pony Guar for meat and hides. Netch men domesticate netches for leather and their jelly, which the Dunmer hold in high regard for both culinary and decorative purposes. Perhaps more well known outside of Morrowind are Quama eggs. They are the foremost agricultural product of the Dunmer, with huge mines dedicated to farming them. The eggs are harvested by Quama miners, who take great care to leave enough eggs to sustain the colony, and Quama eggs are a staple of the Dunmeri diet. Their architecture mirrors the alien landscape in which they reside, from large mushroom towers made with magical means, such as those of House Telvanni, to ornate stone structures with high-peaked roofs. Depending on the climate, the ruling house of the area, or what materials are available, you end up with different building styles in most provinces of Morrowind. Their weapons and armour are of a similar alien twist, with bone mould armour being common among the rank and file, a material that is both lighter and stronger than typical chainmail. While wood is rare in Morrowind, as most of the plant life is fungal in nature, it does host huge deposits of volcanic glass, which is used to make ebony armour and weapons, though the term ebony here refers to their appearance rather than the makeup. Dunmer society is often dictated by the rise and fall of noble houses, intrigues within machinations within plots and secrets. Ancestor worship is integral to Dunmer society. They believe the spirits of their ancestors can peer into the future, speak with other spirits, and perform feats of magic most mortals would struggle with. These spirits can be called on to guide and aid a relative in times of need. The Daedra are counted among these spirits as ancestors of the Dunmer people, though they are split into the good Daedra and the bad Daedra, a notion that is a tenet of Saint Voloth, who led the Chimer to Morrowind. And that's the Dunmer. Probably the most alien culture in Tamriel, but fascinating because of it. But what do you think of the Dunmer? Let me know down below. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this mashup of lore and paint, consider subscribing. I release a Painting the Lore video every Friday. Next time we're going to take a look at the Argonians, so until then, farewell.